Make no mistake about it. We are at this moment witnessing a concerted, coordinated, bipartisan campaign to overthrow the government of Venezuela. This campaign has at its center a vicious, well-funded propaganda machine, and its intent is to bring down a government that, with all of its flaws, faults, mistakes, problems, has tried to build an alternative economic system to neoliberalism. There is a raging debate in Venezuela right now about the policies and actions of President Nicolas Maduro, and the opposition to Maduro is not just right-wing puppets of Washington. There are former allies of Hugo Chavez who oppose the Maduro government, and Venezuelans have an undeniable right to choose their elected leaders. But that is not the right of the United States government. It's not the right of Nancy Pelosi any more than it's the right of John Bolton or the Canadian government or the German government or the Colombian government. This is a matter for the Venezuelan people to resolve.
It was just 2 weeks ago Maduro was inaugurated and swore to build what he called 21st century socialism. But he's built an economic catastrophe.
Maduro refuses to acknowledge the dozens of countries that recognize opposition leader Juan Guaido, his country's severe economic crisis, nor its desperate need of humanitarian aid.
Nicolas Maduro responded today with a show of force. State TV broadcast pictures of him with his military.
The way that this story has been portrayed in major U.S. media is that Maduro is a dictator governing an undemocratic regime. He's starving his own people, depriving them of medicine, repressing them with the military, blocking humanitarian aid. This is how propaganda works. This is cut from the same cloth as the machinations leading up to the Iraq invasion. The broader context of why the Venezuelan economy is in the state that it's in, what actually happened in the 2018 presidential election there, the actual agenda of the major U.S.-backed right-wing opposition, none of this is discussed seriously in the United States. We don't even hear about the advancements made in Venezuela over the past 20 years that have overwhelmingly benefited the poorest and most disenfranchised people. Once Washington declares you a dictator, it's over. Facts no longer matter. Context no longer matters. History gets rewritten. This regime change campaign is not about freeing the Venezuelan people. It's about crushing an effort to organize society in a different way. It's about ensuring that free market capitalism and neoliberal agendas are enforced. None of this is to dispute that Venezuelans have an inherent right to challenge their government or to fight democratically to unseat Maduro. There are serious and legitimate debates in Venezuela right now about Maduro's policies and his government. What I'm saying is that the real questions for people in the United States should center around the role of their government, of Washington's true agenda here, and the way that public opinion is being intentionally manipulated in order to support an imperial, economic, and possibly military war.
The government of Nicolas Maduro used a fuel tanker and cargo trailers yesterday to block a bridge that connects Venezuela to Colombia. The standoff came as the U.S. sent supplies to the border area.
This so-called standoff is being portrayed as Maduro blocking humanitarian aid. It's meant to be an inciting incident. It's meant to make us believe that Maduro is a heartless tyrant. But here are the facts. The U.S. is screaming about how Venezuela responded to a reported $20 million in aid. It's being portrayed as though Maduro is intentionally starving his own people by depriving them of this urgently needed American aid. This so-called aid from the U.S. and the way that this has unfolded, it's a provocation aimed at justifying whatever moves come next. Here is the fact. The sanctions that the U.S. has slapped on Venezuela cost the country an estimated $30 million a day. That should be the scandal. The U.S. is depriving the Venezuelan people of $30 million a day and then turning around and declaring Maduro one of the great monsters of history for blocking a shipment that the U.S. tried to drive into Venezuela without any coordination with the government or with major aid agencies. The International Committee of the Red Cross has refused to participate in Washington's aid stunt, with its spokesperson in Colombia saying, quote, "We will not be participating in what is, for us, not humanitarian aid." Another senior Red Cross official said that the U.S. aid had a, quote, "political tone."
At the moment, this is the big challenge that the humanitarian aid has been politicized. It is dividing the political debate, which it shouldn't be.
The United Nations also threw shade on Washington's motives and warned against using aid as a pawn in Venezuela, with the UN spokesperson saying, quote, humanitarian action needs to be independent of political, military, or other objectives. And let us remember that the U.S. has used the cover of humanitarian aid to actually conduct covert weapons shipments and to aid right-wing rebels in Latin America. Don't forget that it was Trump's point man on Venezuela, Elliot Abrams, who was a direct part of that covert program in the 1980s to cynically foment war in Central America while calling it aid. What we are witnessing now is a totally cooked-up propaganda campaign aimed at obliterating any discussion of the harsh, anti-humanitarian economic warfare that the U.S. is waging against ordinary Venezuelans. And that's what these sanctions are intended to do: strangle, starve, torture ordinary Venezuelans into bowing down before Washington and supporting the overthrow of a government that the U.S. doesn't like. At the same time, the U.S. is reportedly meeting with members of the Venezuelan armed forces, no doubt discussing efforts to overthrow or bring down the government of Venezuela. We have reports of flights from Miami, Florida, being used in an attempt to smuggle weapons into Venezuela.
McClatchy is reporting Venezuelan authorities have uncovered 19 assault weapons, 118 ammunition cartridges, and 90 military-grade radio antennas on board a U.S.-owned plane that had flown from Miami into Valencia, Venezuela's third-largest city.
We have seen this story play out repeatedly throughout history, and now we're watching it unfold in real time. Washington has chosen a pliant puppet, Juan Guaido, to pretend to be president, and they plotted with him to create this mirage of legitimacy.
2 weeks ago, the United States officially recognized the legitimate government of Venezuela and its new president, Juan Guaido.
Anyone who believes that Donald Trump has the best intentions for the people and nation of Venezuela at heart is willingly participating in a grand lie.
We stand with the Venezuelan people in their noble quest for freedom, and we condemn the brutality of the Maduro regime, whose socialist policies have turned that nation from being the wealthiest in South America into a state of abject poverty and despair.
But this isn't just Trump. The highest-ranking Democrat in the United States, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi, is openly backing this coup d'etat.
On Capitol Hill, the Democratic establishment has largely supported President Trump's efforts to oust Maduro. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi tweeted Thursday, "America stands by the people of Venezuela as they rise up against authoritarian rule and demand respect for human rights and democracy."
In this campaign, the true history of U.S. interventionism must be disregarded. All of the coups, the dirty wars, the election interference, the invasions and occupations, the support for terrorism, the arming and backing of so-called rebels, all of this must be ignored or explained away. This, we are told, this is actually a good regime change operation. Let's be honest, the U.S. never intervenes for humanitarian reasons. There is always some nefarious plot or motive at the center. And in this case, the Trump people are all saying the quiet parts out loud.
Venezuela is one of the three countries I call the troika of tyranny. It'll make a big difference to the United States economically if we could have American oil companies really invest in and produce the oil capabilities in Venezuela. It'd be good for the people of Venezuela. It'd be good for the people of the United States. We both have a lot at stake here.